she had never imagined herself in front of a crowd. The thought alone made her stomach twist into tight knots. She had always been the kind of person who preferred to stay in the background, quietly watching, quietly listening, and quietly living her life. Today, though, she found herself in a situation she could have never predicted. It had all started as a small, casual event. At her workplace, a community talent gathering meant to bring people together in a fun, lighthearted way. Everyone was invited, everyone had a role, and everyone was supposed to be relaxed and cheerful. Except her. She had agreed to attend at the insistence of a coworker who had promised it would be fun. She had hesitated, thinking of all the reasons she should stay home. She wasn't outgoing. She wasn't confident in social settings. And she certainly didn't see herself performing in front of strangers, even if they were just her colleagues. But eventually she had given in. It seemed harmless. How wrong she had been. The room was small, but cozy. It was filled with folding chairs arranged in a semicircle and a small stage that barely raised anyone above the floor. The walls were decorated with colorful streamers. A banner hung across the front that read, "Community Talent Night, Show Your Skills." The air smelled faintly of coffee and popcorn. There was chatter everywhere, and the sound of laughter and clinking cups filled the space. She felt like a small, invisible creature trying to move quietly through a noisy, bustling world. She had just settled into her chair at the back, hoping to remain unnoticed, when a voice called her name. She looked up, startled. One of her coworkers had been teasing her playfully earlier in the week, asking if she had any hidden talents that no one knew about. She had laughed nervously, brushing it off, thinking no one really expected her to do anything. Now the same coworker had jumped up with a mischievous grin and announced to the group that she was going to perform. Something tonight, her stomach dropped. She opened her mouth, tried to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Before she could find her voice, the coworker had already dragged her forward, waving her toward the small stage. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, her hands trembling, her throat tight. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink through the floor and vanish completely. The room fell quiet for a moment as she reached the stage. She could hear whispers, half amused and half curious. A few people chuckled softly, thinking it was a joke. Some of the younger attendees even pulled out their phones, possibly to record the moment. She could feel every eye on her, scanning her as if she were an exhibit. Her mind raced. What could she possibly do? She had never practiced performing in public. She had never thought anyone would watch her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her legs felt heavy, like they were made of lead. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold on to the edge of the stage. The laughter had not been cruel, but it had been enough to make her feel small, exposed, and unprepared. She glanced down at the floor, wishing she could disappear, wishing the world would simply go away for a few minutes. But she couldn't. She was trapped in this spotlight. Whether she liked it or not, then, almost by accident, she remembered something she had buried deep inside herself. A quiet, private part of her life that she rarely shared. She had a skill, one she had never thought to reveal outside of her bedroom. She had spent years playing the piano in her small apartment, the notes carrying her thoughts and emotions when words could not. No one in her office knew about it. She had never mentioned it to friends or family. It was hers alone. Her mind raced. Could she really do it now? Could she really pull herself together and play something? She had only a small portable keyboard brought for the event. No big grand piano, no fancy setup, just a small instrument that fit on a table. She hadn't imagined performing in front of anyone with it, let alone a room full of people who were already expecting to laugh. Her heart pounded in her chest. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, to escape, to hide, but she didn't move. Somehow, some tiny spark inside her told her to stay. She could feel it, faint and fragile, but unmistakable. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, this could be her moment to turn something awful into something beautiful. Something that started as embarrassment could become a chance to shine. She hesitated for only a second longer before stepping toward the keyboard. Setting her trembling hands on the keys, the room remained silent. The audience waiting, curious, some still smirking with amusement. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself breathe, trying to push away the fear. It's the humiliation, the anxiety that threatened to choke her. She focused on the music she had played countless times when no one was watching. The melodies that had comforted her during lonely nights. She remembered how it felt to lose herself in the sound, to feel a wave of peace wash over her with every note. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant at first. Then, slowly, she pressed down on the first note. It sounded soft, unsure, trembling along with her. She heard a few murmurs in the audience, some curious, some doubtful. She drew in another deep breath and continued. The second note, the third, the fourth, each one gained a little more confidence, a little more strength. She could feel the music flowing through her, almost like it had been waiting for this moment to be shared, and then something shifted. The whispers, the smirks, the doubts in the room began to fade. People started to notice the sound itself. It was simple, yes, and unpolished, but it had a raw honesty that caught them off guard. The melody carried something real, something human, something that made them sit up a little straighter, pay closer attention. She didn't see them yet, but she could feel it in the air. The energy in the room was changing, and she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could do this. For the first time that evening, she stopped thinking about humiliation. She stopped worrying about what people might think. She wasn't performing to impress anyone. She was playing because she had to, because it was a part of her, a piece of herself she had never let anyone see. Her fingers moved more freely now, finding the rhythm, letting the music take over. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing became steady, and the trembling in her hands slowed. The audience, once ready to laugh, now sat in quiet anticipation. Some leaned forward in their chairs, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of the moment. A few even closed their eyes, letting the music touch them, feeling something familiar stir inside them. She had no idea she could have this effect. She had always thought of herself as ordinary, invisible, small but in this room. In this moment, she felt the power of her own voice, her own skill, her own courage. Time seemed to stretch. Every note she played was a little victory over fear. Every chord was a little rebellion against the embarrassment that had brought her here. She had walked onto the stage feeling humiliated, feeling exposed, feeling like a joke, canned yet now. With each measure, she was reclaiming herself. She was taking something that had started as pain and slowly turning it into something meaningful. And though it was only the beginning, the first step, she knew deep down that this moment mattered. Not for the applause, not for the attention, not for the validation from others, but for her. For the realization that she could face fear, that she could confront humiliation, and that even the smallest, quietest person could create something beautiful in front of others. As she finished the short piece she had chosen, she hesitated again. The last note lingered in the air, and for a heartbeat, everything was still. Then came the reaction, soft at first. A few claps, a few murmurs of approval. She opened her eyes slowly, in the sight of the audience, now watching her with genuine curiosity and surprise, made her heart swell with something she hadn't felt before. Hope. She had come to the event expecting humiliation. She had walked onto the stage expecting to fail. And yet here she was, a small spark of courage lighting up a room full of strangers. She didn't yet know how far this journey would take her, but she felt the first flicker of a remarkable change. What had started as a moment of embarrassment was slowly, quietly, becoming something else, a moment of possibility. And in that moment, she understood something important. Sometimes, the most unexpected opportunities to shine come from the places we fear the most. Sometimes, the very thing that makes us want to hide can become the thing that shows the world who we really are. She took a deep breath, smiled to herself, and prepared for whatever came next. Not knowing that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything, she stepped off the stage, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. Relief because she had survived the moment, and disbelief because, somehow, she had actually done it. The applause was gentle, polite, but it was real, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel proud. She still could not believe that she had stood in front of a crowd, that she had played something she loved, and that people had actually listened. For years, she had hidden this part of herself, thinking it was just a private hobby, something meant for quiet nights and empty rooms. But now it had become real, and the effect on her was more powerful than she expected. She returned to her seat, hands still trembling slightly, and tried to calm her racing heart. The room seemed quieter now, almost holding its breath, as though the audience had paused to watch her settle. She could feel a few curious glances, subtle nods of approval, even a few smiles directed at her. It was a strange sensation, being noticed not for what she was supposed to do, but for something she had never shared before. She looked down at her hands, still warm from the keyboard, and felt a flicker of something she had not felt in a long time dash possibility as she sat there. Replaying the moment in her mind, she began to notice something else. Her coworkers, the same ones who had teased her just minutes before, were watching with genuine interest. They were talking quietly among themselves, but their tone had changed. The smirks and the teasing laughter were gone. In their place was curiosity, and even a little respect. She realized then that she had done more than play music. She had changed their perception of her, and maybe even their perception of what was possible. But even as this thought sank in, a shadow of doubt crept back. Was it really that impressive? Or was it just luck? She had only played a short piece, nothing grand or complicated. What if someone came along who could play better, or sing better, or dance better? Would this moment disappear as quickly as it had come? She shook her head slightly, trying to push the worry away. She had no way of knowing what would come next. All she could do was hold on to the small victory she had just earned. She noticed the event was still ongoing. Other performers stepping up to the stage. A few were singing, a few were telling stories, some were doing small skits. She realized that each person was nervous in their own way, just as she had been. Some people were naturally confident, but even they had small signs of worry, hands shaking, voices uncertain. She felt a quiet connection with them, a recognition that fear was part of the process for everyone. And yet it also reminded her that fear could be overcome, if only one had the courage to step forward. As the evening went on, she found herself watching more closely. She noticed the little details in the audience, the way someone's eyes lit up when they heard a familiar tune, the way people leaned forward when a story became emotional, the small smiles exchanged between strangers who were enjoying the moment together. She realized that her performance, small and simple as it had been, was part of a larger experience for everyone in the room. The music she had played had touched them, even if only for a few seconds. That realization made her feel connected in a way she had never expected. Between performances, she had a moment to herself. She stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, feeling the cool evening breeze brush against her face. The city lights glimmered in the distance, and she thought about how small and ordinary she had always considered herself. Yet tonight, something inside her had shifted. She felt a tiny spark of courage growing stronger, a sense that perhaps she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She took another deep breath and allowed herself to smile, a quiet, private smile that carried the weight of small triumphs. Back inside, the audience was starting to respond differently to the next performers. Some were cheered, some clapped, and some simply listened quietly. She noticed a subtle change in herself as well. She was no longer the person who had walked into the room hoping to hide. She was someone who had faced fear, who had risked humiliation, and who had come out stronger. It was a small change, almost imperceptible, but it mattered. She realized that this evening, this moment, was a turning point. Her mind drifted back to the music she had played. She thought about the long hours she had spent practicing alone, the nights when she had been tired, sad, or frustrated, and yet had returned to the piano because it was the one thing that made her feel alive. She realized that all of those hours had prepared her for this exact moment. It was not luck that had carried her through, it was skill, dedication, and the quiet courage she had never given herself credit for. The thought made her feel proud, even if only quietly to herself. She began to consider the possibilities. What if she allowed herself to take more risks? What if she shared her talent in other places, in other ways? The idea made her heart race with both excitement and fear. She knew the path would not be easy. There would be setbacks, there would be mistakes, there would be moments of embarrassment. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of readiness. She was ready to face whatever came next, whatever challenges or surprises the world had in store for her. As the evening wore on, she found herself drawn back to the keyboard. She couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the music itself, calling her back, reminding her of the joy it brought her. Perhaps it was the audience, now looking at her with a new kind of attention, silently encouraging her to continue. She didn't know if she would play again tonight, but the desire to try had taken root. She wanted to see if she could go further. She could push past the nervousness and discover what else she was capable of. She watched the performers who followed her, noticing their own moments of vulnerability. One young man was singing softly, his voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as he continued. A woman was telling a story about her childhood, and the room was completely absorbed. She realized that everyone in the room had something to share, something that mattered, and that the act of stepping forward, risking exposure, was what made it powerful. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being real. Her thoughts turned to her coworkers again. She had always felt like they saw her as quiet, ordinary, almost invisible. But tonight, she had glimpsed a different reality. They were capable of surprise, capable of seeing beyond the surface, capable of recognizing talent and courage when they saw it. She wondered if this would change her relationships with them, if they would treat her differently, or if the memory of this evening would fade over time. She decided not to worry about it. What mattered was what she felt inside, the growing confidence that was slowly replacing the fear. She took another deep breath and let her mind wander to the future. She imagined herself practicing more, improving her skills, perhaps performing again in front of an audience. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. She knew she would have to be brave, and she knew that fear would return. But she also knew now that fear was not the enemy, was a signal that something mattered, that something was worth doing. And for the first time, she felt a quiet excitement at the thought of embracing fear rather than avoiding it. The evening was coming to a close, and the final performer had just finished. The room erupted into applause, and she joined in, clapping for the courage of others, just as others had clapped for her. She felt a sense of connection, a sense of being part of something larger than herself. For so long she had felt small and separate, quietly observing life from the sidelines. Tonight, she had stepped into the center, even if only for a few minutes, and it had changed her. As people began to gather their things and leave, she lingered for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The embarrassment she had felt at first had not disappeared entirely, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a weight to bear, but a reminder of what she had overcome. She had faced a moment that terrified her, and she had found strength she didn't know she had. The realization was empowering, and she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the music itself. She packed up the small keyboard and stepped outside, feeling the cool night air on her face. The city was quiet, lights twinkling in the distance, and she walked slowly, savoring the calm after the excitement of the evening. She thought about what she would do next, how she would nurture this newfound courage, and how she could continue to challenge herself. The possibilities seemed endless, and for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to explore them. She understood that this was only the beginning. The humiliation that had brought her to the stage had been transformed into a spark that could grow into something much larger. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain: she would never let fear alone dictate her actions again. She had discovered a truth that went beyond music, beyond applause, beyond the opinions of others. She had discovered herself, and as she walked home under the quiet night sky, she smiled to herself, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, and new opportunities. But she also knew that she now had a strength she could carry with her, a reminder that even the most ordinary person could find extraordinary courage when faced with the right moment. The night had begun with embarrassment, with anxiety, with fear, but it had ended with a quiet triumph, a small victory that would stay with her forever, guiding her toward the next chapter of her journey. The next day, she woke up with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. Even in the quiet of her apartment, she could still hear the echo of the music from last night. It wasn't loud, not in the way a concert would be, but faint, like it had left a tiny imprint in her mind. She realized she had spent more time thinking about that short performance than she ever thought possible. She remembered the looks on the faces of her coworkers, the small nods, the surprised expressions. It was as if, for a brief moment, she had shown them something they didn't expect, and maybe even something they hadn't seen in her before. For breakfast, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The morning light streamed in, warm and soft, and she allowed herself a few quiet moments to reflect. She thought about how she had felt yesterday, how the fear had been almost paralyzing at first, and how something inside her had pushed her forward. That spark she had felt, the tiny flicker of courage, had not gone out overnight. It was still there, burning quietly, and she realized that it was calling her. It was telling her that she could do more, that she didn't have to stay in the shadows. She decided to practice again. Not for anyone else, not for applause or approval, but for herself. She set up the small keyboard in the middle of her living room and sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. At first, the notes were hesitant, just as they had been last night. Her fingers shook slightly, her heart beat faster, and she wondered if the fear would ever completely leave. But then she closed her eyes, as she had done on the stage, and let the music flow through her. Slowly, steadily, the hesitation began to fade. As she played, she began to notice the difference. Last night had been the first time she had performed for an audience, and it had been thrilling in a way she could not have anticipated. But now, with the room to herself, she could focus on the small details she had never paid attention to before the touch of her fingertips on the keys. The way a chord could make her chest swell with emotion. The subtle shifts in rhythm that could completely change the feeling of a piece. She realized she had been holding back all these years, playing only in fragments, never daring to explore the full depth of what she could do. Hours passed like minutes. She lost track of time as she moved through her repertoire, experimenting with new melodies, trying different tempos, and even attempting pieces she had once thought too difficult. There was a thrill in challenging herself, in proving to herself that she could do more than she had imagined. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel proud, not in a boastful way, but in a quiet, personal way that warmed her heart and strengthened her resolve. Her thoughts drifted back to last night. She remembered how the audience had reacted, how their expressions had changed from amusement to surprise to admiration. She realized that her performance had had an effect, not just on her, but on them as well. That thought both excited and frightened her. Excited because it showed her that she had the ability to touch others with her music. Frightened because it meant that if she tried again, the stakes were higher. People might expect more. What if she failed next time? What if she wasn't as good as they hoped? But the fear no longer stopped her. Instead, it became a challenge. She reminded herself that fear was a sign that something mattered. She needed to feel it, acknowledge it, and then move through it. She thought about the moment when she had first walked onto the stage, hands trembling, cheeks burning, every part of her body telling her to run. And yet she had stayed. She had faced the fear, and in doing so, had discovered something inside herself that she had never known existed. That realization was empowering. Later that afternoon, she received a text from a coworker. It was simple, just a few words. "That was amazing last night. You really surprised us all?" She stared at the screen, a small smile forming on her lips. The message was brief, but it carried more weight than she could have imagined. Someone had noticed. Someone had appreciated her courage, her skill, and her willingness to step forward. It was a reminder that the small spark she had felt yesterday could grow into something larger, something meaningful. Encouraged by the message, she began thinking about the next opportunity. The community center was planning another event, a larger gathering that included people from other neighborhoods. She had the chance to participate again, but the thought made her anxious. The crowd would be bigger. The stakes would be higher. More eyes, more opinions, more chances for embarrassment. She felt the familiar flutter of fear in her stomach, but this time it was accompanied by a new sensation, excitement. The fear no longer felt paralyzing. It felt like a signal that this was worth trying. She spent the next few days practicing diligently. Each session was a small victory, a quiet triumph over self-doubt. She tried pieces she had never attempted before, pieces that required skill, concentration, and emotion. She experimented with dynamics, with tempo, with expression. She discovered the joy of creating music that felt alive, that could carry emotion, that could tell a story without words. The keyboard became more than an instrument, it became a bridge between her inner world and the outside world. A way to communicate without speaking, a way to connect without fear. Her confidence grew, slowly but steadily. She found herself smiling more often, feeling lighter, noticing small joys in everyday life. The fear she had carried for so long no longer dominated her thoughts. She still felt nervous, yes, but the nervousness was now a companion rather than a cage. It reminded her to stay alert, to stay focused, to respect the challenge. And it reminded her that the moments when she felt fear most intensely were often the moments that mattered most. One evening, she decided to test herself in a new way. She went to a small cafe known for its casual open mic nights. She hadn't planned to perform publicly, but she wanted to feel the atmosphere, to see the space, to imagine herself stepping onto a stage in front of strangers. She sat at a corner table, quietly observing the performers. Some were confident and polished, others were shy and tentative. She noticed the same patterns she had seen before: nervousness, uncertainty, and moments of courage. She felt a quiet kinship with them, a recognition that fear and creativity often traveled hand in hand as she watched. She realized that the performers who connected most deeply with the audience were not necessarily the most technically perfect. They were the ones who dared to be real, who allowed themselves to be vulnerable, who shared a part of themselves that was honest and unfiltered. That insight struck her deeply. She thought about her own performance last night, the courage it had taken, and the honesty of the music she had played. She realized that she had already discovered a truth that others were just learning, that authenticity mattered more than perfection. Inspired, she returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. She decided to prepare for the next community event with intentionality. She would not just play to avoid embarrassment. She would play to express herself, to challenge herself, and to see what she could create. She began mapping out a set of pieces, practicing transitions, and experimenting with new ideas. She even began to think about improvisation, allowing herself the freedom to explore beyond written music. The excitement of discovery filled her, pushing aside the remnants of doubt. Her daily routine began to change. She woke up earlier to practice. She spent quiet evenings experimenting with melodies and harmonies. She started keeping a small journal, noting her progress, her observations, and her reflections. Each entry was a reminder of how far she had come, how much courage she had summoned, and how much potential lay ahead. She began to understand that growth was a process, not a single event, and that every small step mattered. One morning, while practicing a particularly challenging piece, she made a breakthrough. She had been struggling with a difficult passage for days, but today her fingers moved with confidence, precision, and expression. The notes flowed seamlessly, and for a moment she felt as if she had unlocked a new level of skill within herself. The feeling was intoxicating. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and allowed herself to savor the moment. This was more than music, it was a revelation. She was capable of more than she had ever imagined, and she was only beginning to explore her own potential. As the next community event approached, her anticipation grew. She was nervous, of course, but the nervousness was tempered by excitement and confidence. She knew she had work to do, and she was ready to put in the effort. She even imagined herself walking onto the stage, playing her music, and feeling the connection with the audience. The visualization made her pulse quicken, but in a positive way. It was no longer fear alone. It was energy, readiness, and courage. When the day of the event finally arrived, she felt a familiar thrill. She walked into the room, carrying her small keyboard, and looked around. The space was larger than the last event, and the crowd was more diverse. She could feel the weight of expectation in the air, both from others and from herself. But this time, she did not shrink back. She held her head high, took a deep breath, and reminded herself of the courage she had summoned before. She was ready to face the moment, to take the stage again, and to see what she could accomplish. The performance began. She stepped forward, her heart beating steadily, and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes were soft but confident. The audience listened, curious, and as she continued, she felt the familiar flow of music connecting her to the room. She no longer worried about judgment or embarrassment. She focused on the sound, on the emotion, on the story she wanted to tell. With every note, she felt herself grow stronger, more capable, more alive. By the time she finished the first piece, she noticed the audience leaning forward, listening intently. Their expressions had changed from casual curiosity to genuine engagement. She felt a thrill of accomplishment, but also a deeper sense of connection. The music had done more than entertain, it had spoken, and the audience had heard. She realized then that her courage, her skill, and her authenticity had created something meaningful. As she prepared for the next piece, she felt a quiet confidence. She knew that fear would always be there, but she also knew that she could face it, move through it, and emerge stronger. The humiliation of the past was no longer a shadow over her. It was a stepping stone. She had discovered that the very thing that once terrified her could become the source of her greatest strength, and in that moment, she understood that this journey was far from over. There were more challenges ahead, more opportunities to grow, and more chances to connect with others through her music. But she also knew that she was ready. She had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and discovered a part of herself she had never known existed. And that knowledge, that courage, would carry her forward into whatever came next, transforming each moment of doubt into an opportunity for brilliance. The evening air was cool as she arrived at the community hall, carrying her small keyboard with practiced ease. She had been here before, but tonight felt different. There was a sense of energy in the room, a buzz that seemed to hum through the air, and she could feel it in her chest. The hall was larger than the last event, with rows of chairs stretching farther than she could see. People had come from nearby neighborhoods, families, friends, and strangers who had heard about the community talent event. Some had come for the music, some for curiosity, and some for the simple joy of seeing others perform. She set up her keyboard on the small stage, arranging it carefully and adjusting the stool until it felt just right. Her hands shook slightly, but not with fear this time. It was anticipation, excitement, mixed with a little tension. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, and remembered the first time she had ever performed here. The humiliation, the embarrassment, the fear that had threatened to paralyze her. She thought of how far she had come since then, how much she had practiced, how much she had learned, and how much courage she had found within herself. The room began to fill, and she noticed the diversity of the crowd. There were children fidgeting with excitement, parents chatting quietly, older adults settling into their seats, and a few people who looked as if they had been here many times before. Some were smiling and relaxed, while others had a more serious expression, as if preparing themselves for something meaningful. She felt a strange mixture of nerves and focus, knowing that this performance mattered not just for her, but for the people who were here to witness it. As the previous performer finished, the applause faded, and the organizers introduced her. Her name, simple and unassuming, echoed through the hall. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it was smaller now, manageable, almost comforting in its presence. She stepped forward, placed her hands on the keys, and closed her eyes for a moment. She let the air settle, letting her mind focus on the music, the emotion, and the story she wanted to share. The first note was soft, tentative, but full of intention. Her fingers moved carefully at first, then gradually found confidence as the melody unfolded. The sound filled the room, simple yet rich, resonating through the hall and into the hearts of the audience. She could feel the attention shift, the subtle changes in the atmosphere as people leaned forward, eyes widening, expressions softening. The whispers of curiosity from the first notes had disappeared, placed by quiet focus. She played with more confidence now, letting her hands move freely across the keys. The music carried emotion, a story without words, and she could see it reflected in the audience. A mother held her child closer. A young man sat straighter in his chair, and an older woman closed her eyes, a small smile on her lips. She realized that this connection was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't about applause or recognition, it was about sharing a part of herself and being understood in return. Her fingers danced over the keys, shifting between melodies and harmonies, moving from soft, gentle notes to stronger, more powerful chords. She could feel the energy of the room responding, not in volume, but in presence. The audience was fully engaged, their focus entirely on the music, their attention held by something real, something honest. She had never felt this kind of connection before, and it filled her with a quiet joy, a sense of purpose she could hardly put into words. As she continued, she noticed subtle reactions throughout the room. People who had been chatting moments ago had gone silent. Some were leaning forward, captivated by the emotion in the music. A few had tears in their eyes, moved by the sincerity of her performance. She realized that the music was speaking to them in a way words could not. It was as if each note carried a piece of her heart, and they were listening, receiving it, feeling it, and responding with their presence. The performance grew bolder, more expressive. She allowed herself to take risks, to explore new rhythms and melodies, improvising in ways she had only practiced alone. Her confidence soared with each passing moment. She no longer thought about fear, about humiliation, or about judgment. She was fully immersed in the music, fully aware of the audience, yet entirely focused on the flow of emotion and expression. She noticed a young girl near the front, sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide with wonder. The girl's fascination reminded her of herself, years ago. When she had first discovered the joy of music alone in her apartment, she smiled to herself, realizing that her performance was not just about her. It was about inspiring others, about sharing a spark that could light a small fire in someone else's heart. That thought gave her even more energy, more courage, and more determination to continue. The hall seemed to shrink as she played. The rows of chairs, the crowd, the stage all faded into the background. It was just her and the music, flowing freely, carrying emotion, creating a story that needed no words. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional, each chord carrying meaning. She felt alive, fully present, and fully herself in a way she had never been before. Midway through her performance, she hit a particularly challenging section she had been practicing for days. Her fingers moved with precision, yet there was a freedom to the motion, a sense of play and exploration. She felt a surge of exhilaration as she overcame the difficulty, realizing that the months of practice, the hours of persistence, the countless small failures and victories had prepared her for this exact moment. She was ready, fully ready, and the audience could sense it. The response from the audience became more pronounced. Whispers of admiration, small gasps of surprise, and the occasional quiet laugh of delight filled the hall. People exchanged looks, nodding to one another, clearly impressed by the authenticity and skill in her performance. She could see the transformation happening in real time, from curiosity to engagement to awe. Her music had taken control of the room, and she was at the center of it, not as a showy star, but as a genuine presence, sharing something meaningful. She transitioned into a slower, more emotional piece, letting the notes linger in the air. The room grew quiet, completely absorbed, every ear straining to catch each sound. She allowed herself to feel the emotion fully, letting the music reflect her journey, the fear, the courage, the triumph over doubt. She could feel the audience responding, not just to the technical skill, but to the honesty, the vulnerability she had dared to show. Her mind wandered briefly to the first time she had played here, when she had been terrified, humiliated, and uncertain. The contrast between that moment and this one was staggering. She had walked onto the stage trembling, expecting laughter, and now she was here, commanding attention, holding hearts, and moving people without words. The realization brought a lump to her throat and a quiet smile to her lips. She understood then that the most profound moments often arise from the moments we fear most. She continued with a lively, uplifting piece, letting the rhythm fill the room with energy and light. The audience began to sway subtly, caught in the music, caught in the moment. She could hear clapping from the back, quiet at first, then more pronounced as the piece reached its peak. The energy in the room shifted, From observation to participation, from passive listening to active engagement, she felt a thrill of exhilaration, a rush that made her fingers move faster, her heart beat stronger, and her soul soar. As she approached the final section, she allowed herself to pour everything into the performance. Every note, every pause, every movement carried intention, meaning, and emotion. She was fully present, fully alive, fully herself. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if the audience sensed the climax, the turning point of the experience. She could see faces leaning forward, eyes wide, hands gripping chairs, bodies leaning in to catch every note. She felt a deep connection with each person, as if the music were a thread linking their hearts to hers. The final chord lingered in the air, resonating with power and beauty. Silence followed for a heartbeat, then a wave of applause erupted. It started as a few hands, then more, until the entire hall was clapping, cheering, and some even standing. The sound was overwhelming, joyful, and humbling all at once. She looked out over the audience, feeling a surge of gratitude, relief, and exhilaration. She had done it. She had transformed fear and uncertainty into something beautiful, something that moved people. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the moment. People were clapping, smiling, and some were even wiping away tears. She realized that her performance had created something larger than herself, a shared experience of emotion, courage, and connection. The room had changed because she had dared to step forward, and she had changed because the audience had responded with openness, appreciation, and empathy. When the applause finally subsided, she allowed herself a deep breath. Savoring the energy, the joy, and the sense of triumph, she realized that this was not just a personal victory. It was proof that moments of fear, moments of potential humiliation, could become the foundation for extraordinary experiences. She had faced the thing she feared most, and in doing so, created something unforgettable. She stepped back from the keyboard, letting the final echoes of the notes settle in the hall. People were still talking, still clapping, still exchanging looks of admiration. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey from embarrassment to this show-stopping moment had been long and difficult, but every step had been worth it. She had discovered courage, authenticity, the transformative power of sharing her true self with others, and in that moment, she knew that the story was far from over. She had experienced something incredible, something that would stay with her forever, guiding her toward future performances, future risks, and future opportunities to connect, inspire, and shine. The fear that had once held her back had become the very catalyst for her triumph.